honestly. I think if teams were to hire more content designers, they would have, the ROI is just huge. But I think people like to come across as smart, or they like to present their products as sophisticated. So there's a lot of jargon in websites and apps because, like, big words, people think, oh, that sounds smart. Or if your product is expensive, you want to use big fancy words. But I'd say Sarah Richards from User Experience London, she wrote the book Content Design, like the first book called Content Design. She's a big proponent of plain language, and it's so important to use simple words. It's harder to write simply than it is to use big long sentences, big long words. But if you can simplify things, that helps with customer engagement. That helps boost your customers' confidence, your audience's confidence, and their trust in you.
This is Erin May.
I'm John Henry Forster, and this is Awkward Silences.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Awkward Silences. Today, we're here with Erica Jorgensen, the staff content designer at Chewy and author of a great new book that you can buy. It's called Strategic Content Design: Tools and Research Techniques for Better UX. We'll say this again later, but if you want to pick up the book, we've got a discount for you, which is AS15. You can get it at Rosenfeld Media. Erica, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about content design, fittingly.
Yes, content design, content strategy, content testing, all that jazz.
Awesome. Then we got Carol here too.
Hi, everyone. Carol here. So excited to talk about content. I think many of us have been in the room where we had debates and confusion over what to put on the page. So can't wait to dig into it.
It's hard. It's hard work, isn't it?
Yeah, but important. So those are the best topics. Awesome. Well, let's start from the beginning. I know content design has gone through something of a rebirth or renaissance, recently. It's gone by many names. It was, UX writing, and we seem to have kind of landed on content design. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is content design and what is content research in the context of content design.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I credit Andy Wellflett and Michael Metz for, I don't know if they coined the term content design, but they definitely helped promote the use of the term content design. And I think what it means is when you're working on content for a website or app or digital experience of any sort, it's important to know what words to put where, not just what words to use. So if you're looking at information architecture, information hierarchy, progressive disclosure, it's really important to work closely with product designers to carve out the experience, not just plug in lorem ipsum content. That to me is like heartbreaking and a little soul crushing, to be looped into a project when there's already lorem ipsum content. That's not cool. And then the customer experience inevitably isn't as good as it could be, isn't as smooth, isn't as helpful. You're introducing friction if you're not collaborating with content design and product design at the same time. And the words are important, I think, to answer your question about content research and content testing. Which words are working is really hard to know. And I think people who work in content have really good instincts and experience and love writing. Not everyone loves to write, but whether your audience is clear on the words is something that you need to find out. You need to ask them what words are appealing to them, clear to them, effective. You can find out what words people are likely to click on or not, and why. And I think the why part is mostly what my book is about, is like finding out what's going on in people's heads is really fascinating. And I think a quick example I can provide for that is a former coworker at Microsoft, Dylan Romero. He teaches content strategy at Seattle Pacific University. He's a really great guy. He did a content test on sign in or log in. Which would an audience prefer? And he thought that sign in would be more clear, that login is kind of an antiquated term. I think of login reminds me of, honestly, like basic programming from like the olden days. But he found out that there's a generational difference, that younger people preferred login because they thought sign in was a little bit too personal, like was asking for too much personal information, was asking about their names and such. So they preferred login, even though it's a little bit more technical, and maybe I thought login was sort of a passé term that we wouldn't use. Generally, most companies I've worked for in the last 5 to 10 years have said, don't use login, use sign in. But Dylan's research found that people preferred login over sign in when people under 40 or so were like, yeah, log in, not sign in. And people over 40 were like, sign in's cool, log in's old. I don't want to feel old, so forget login.
Well, I have about a million questions about that already.
I know. I was like, who knew? And then like, it's the why. It's like, like older people did not want to feel old. They're like, oh no, I don't want to seem out of it. Or, sign in is cool. That's more modern. That's more up to date.
So is that like a universal? Should I be changing my sign in?
No, I wouldn't say that's universal. I think that was
you're
definitely
trying to speak to different age ranges too, right? So then you
right. And I think it depends if you are blessed with an amazing content management system like Adobe Experience Manager or something, or a close partnership with your engineering team. It depends on how you're publishing your content. And I was like, wow, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do with that? And he's like, well, we're going to look at where we can update it. Maybe it's just an email. Maybe it, I'm not sure if he's going to go and update it in every instance on the website or app, but that is a fascinating, I'm sure there's more to unpack there, and there's more terms that have generational specific appeal or lack of appeal.
Yeah, sign in and login is such an interesting one because it's so common. I guess I'm curious if you know in this example why they did that specific research, or maybe just more broadly, how do you know that you need to do content research?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think I'm not sure if Dylan was working on the Office experience at Microsoft. I worked on the Office 365 purchase experience. How do you buy Word? How do you buy the Office suite? Competing with Google. And I think every step of the way is every step that the customer takes as they go from point A to point B is an opportunity to dig in and figure out where's the friction coming from. Microsoft has extremely sophisticated, amazing metrics. They can measure, from step 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they can see which step there's friction because they've tagged it all up, and they have funnel views of where fall off happens between the steps. So like if someone's asked to sign in and they see there's a fall off on that first step, that's where you dig in with the content research, content studies. Yeah. Or if someone adds something to their shopping bag or shopping cart and then they don't check out, or they get stuck on the credit card step, like the specific step where people are getting stuck, little flags, digital flags are being waved by their analytics.
I wonder for teams that maybe are less sophisticated or have smaller teams than Microsoft, are there sort of telltale signs that some area of the product needs more focus on content, or how do you think about where you need it?
Yeah, I think if you don't have those tools, I'd say think about the words that you use all the time without thinking about it, whether it's like when you start a job and you hear people use words, or it's part of the customer experience, it's a product name or the way you describe a product, or like when your spidey sense goes off. And I think this is something that content designers, content strategists are really good at, is that word. Like it jumps, if there's a word jumping out at you when you start working for a company or organization, that's something to listen to. There's an example in my book from Tracy Van de Gem. She worked for a tech company that has like drone apps, drone capabilities, drone services. And there was a term that kept popping up when she was starting. She was like, what is this? And she looked in the style guide. She's like, what is this term? Like, I've never heard of it. This is really weird to me. And everyone in the company was using this term. And it turned out that the customers were really confused by it. So it's good to dig into content research to find out, like, okay, what you're assuming, is that okay to assume? Or do you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out these words that are appearing everywhere? And I think another example in my book that I get into is seat versus license. If you're working for a SaaS company, if people are buying licenses to use your product, I was kind of rabble-rousy when I first started at Microsoft on the content design team. I'm like, is seat or license the right? I'm like, license sounds very heavy. And it was everywhere. It was, how many licenses do you want to buy? It felt bureaucratic and heavy to me. So I dug in.
Yeah, bring out the lawyers.
Yeah, I was like, ugh, it sounds like going to the Department of Motor Vehicles and getting your license renewed on a Saturday in the summer. Like, who wants a license? And to me, seat sounded like going to a concert. You're going to Taylor Swift. You have a seat for the Taylor Swift show, which I'm giving away my Taylor Swift tickets, by the way. I'm traveling. I'm sad. But to me, seat is fun. It just has a more positive connotation. So I did a content study and asked just a handful of folks I think it was 10 or 20, what is the word that you use to describe the thing you need to buy software? And this is a geeky Microsoft example. I've got more less techie examples in the book, but I was like, which word, what do you use? And I asked in a multiple choice format, seat, license, or something else. And 17 out of 20 people are like, license. That's what I would use. And maybe because it's like a self-fulfilling or other fulfilling prophecy. It's like it's used all the time, so people use it. But then I asked people, well, tell me a little bit about what you know about these things. And that sounds like a really basic question. Like, tell me what you know about licenses. And normally, like, you need one license per person, right? But no, au contraire. And this is like another generational thing where some people thought you needed one license for every device, for your phone, for your laptop. So people were buying, not everyone who participated in the study shared this information, but enough people said, oh yeah, you need one license per device. And I was like, whoa, because that means that people are buying too many. And Office isn't cheap. And when you go to renew, if you go to install it and you're like, wow, I got some extra, maybe you don't notice you have those extra licenses. In many cases, you don't. If someone from your company is buying licenses and giving them away to people on the team, you might not notice that you have twice as many as you need. So this was like woo, sirens going off in my head of, oh my gosh, so license is cool, great. And my coworker Trudy's like, I told you, we don't want to change that. It's everywhere. That would be a big pain to change it. And I was like, I know, but what if it's the right thing to do? We should put in the effort to change words that don't make sense. But it was the qualitative, the open-ended feedback where people fessed up, or they didn't know they were confessing, but I was like, my eyes were bugging out of my head when they said you need one license per device. And I was like, uh-oh. And then one person said you need one license per company. And that was another like, uh-oh, they're gonna pay whatever, how much it is per month. Like say they're paying $19 a month and they're trying to give it to everyone in their company and they can't onboard their company to the software because they only bought one license and they have to go back to the website and sign in and buy more. And then the renewal dates are different and then, have to give it out to people. So we ended up putting one little tiny chunk of content on in the purchase path that said you need one license per person. And the designer was like, don't muck, you're mucking with my design. I'm like, I'm not mucking with your design. I'm saving the company from losing customers. I'm helping customers be successful, be happy customers because they're going to buy just what they need and no more. They're going to be more likely to renew. They're going to be less likely to say, forget this, I'm going to Google, or I'm going to find some other kind of, Office suite for presentations, Word, writing, spreadsheets, blah, blah, blah. So digging into license and seat was helpful for many reasons because it helped me feel confident, like, okay, license isn't as our customers are not reacting to that word the way I am. And I'm a nerd. I grew up reading, I'm me. I'm from Boston. I live in Seattle. I am a white woman. Like there's biases inherent in my existence. So, I can use my best educated guess to think about the words that people are seeing, whether they're going to react positively or negatively. Are they going to interact with a call to action button? Or are they going to ignore it? All the verbs and call to action buttons are great things to test because you never know what people are, how they're going to react. And I think a lot of companies, they copy the competition, right? It's like, oh, what is so-and-so or competitor doing? And you go to their website and look at their CTA buttons or look at their content. A lot of companies, especially startups, will just copy the competition without thinking, is it working or not? They just assume that because another website has content on their site, they must have tested it or they must have analytics on it. They must have optimized it. No.
So your spidey sense can be a good kind of instigating event to maybe you want to do some research, but it's not necessarily going to tell you what the conclusion is going to be, right? So in this example, license was kind of like, I don't know about this, right? And then the first cut is sort of, actually people like this, and it's like, well, actually they're familiar with it, but they're confused by it. So it's peeling that onion back, right, and getting to what is the real insight here. And I think, right, if we're going to give this episode a kind of theme, it's that words matter, right? Words are part of the UX.
And assuming is dangerous. Yeah, so words matter and assuming is dangerous. And I think that's, it's the humbling part of content testing, I think is the most fascinating. It's like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. Yeah, and I think it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. If you're assuming and you have all these words on your website, you make you're kind of compounding the friction. It's like sedimentary rock, like layer after layer, like word after word that either is unclear or people can't explain it in their own words 100%. That undermines customer confidence, that undermines engagement. So it's really good to dig in, especially, you know, in your most important customer experiences, whether it's purchase or onboarding or campaigns. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how people react to words, isn't it?
Yes. You mentioned this spidey sense, and then you mentioned really important flows or verbs and calls to action as being really important. And then talked a little bit about internally how you might describe a product. I guess I'm just thinking, are there any other signs that this content is clearly needs extra work, customer feedback, or internally we're confused about what it does? Any of those other signs so people know maybe where to focus?
Jargon. Yeah, I think, well, it's so pathetic that I'll just get on my soapbox for a little bit. There are just so few content designers and content strategists working on teams. You know, there's a preponderance of engineers. That makes sense. There's a lot of product designers. Great. A lot of product managers, but there's like hiring for content seems to always come last, which is shooting yourself in the foot. Honestly, I think if teams were to hire more content designers, they would have, the ROI is just huge. But I think people like to come across as smart, or they like to present their products as sophisticated. So there's a lot of jargon in websites and apps because, like, big words, people think, oh, that sounds smart. Or if your product is expensive, you want to use big fancy words. But I'd say Sarah Richards from User Experience London, she wrote the book Content Design, like the first book called Content Design. She's a big proponent of plain language, and it's so important to use simple words. It's harder to write simply than it is to use big long sentences, big long words. But if you can simplify things, that helps with customer engagement. That helps boost your customers' confidence, your audience's confidence, and their trust in you. And I worked at an insurance company where we had words like health insurance, like, God, health insurance in America, could there be anything more confusing between copays, co-insurance, blah, blah, blah. Adjudicate. These humongous words were peppered throughout the customer experience, and we did all we could to simplify. And the customer, the effect was customers would buy more. Customers would buy more insurance policies. They would be loyal. They would renew their plans because we had simple language throughout the customer experience, in email, on the app, even in our surveys. Yeah.
It's a pretty cynical point of view that like avoiding understanding is a good business philosophy, right? Like generally you want people to understand what you're selling them and what the experience is going to offer them. That seems like a good thing.
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes it's presumptuous that, you know, if you haven't had a content designer in your team who's dug in and said, do we know people are clear on this? You just assume it's working. You just assume it's fine. But that's, yeah. And I think I worked with the lawyers who were like, we're going to use big words, but yeah, you shouldn't.
And not even a conscious assumption, right? Like maybe that goes with what you're saying, but I think a lot of what happens with content in products too, I mean, I've certainly seen this in my experience, I don't know about you, is content gets thrown in somewhere at some point, terms start being used internally, and all of a sudden they're there, like they're forever.
There. And they're persistent, right?
And you don't notice them. It's just like furniture, right? So it's not even like we assume this is good. It's just is. It's just there. We don't notice it.
Right. And that's dangerous. I mean, I don't know. English is so complicated. I think if you're working for a company and you translate your content into multiple languages or localize it into different languages, it's fascinating to think about how culturally words don't translate well either. And I think localization teams are really big on doing content testing too, because if you have your core, this is going to be very American centric if you have, or US centric, if you have your core website and that's being translated, if the core website is not working and you translate it into 10 or 20 or 40 languages, you have made 40 times more problems for yourself. So that's, you know, it's just cost effective to make sure that your key experiences are working, and knowing why is super cool. And I think also a benefit over A/B experiments. I think that's something I am happy to get on another soapbox about is, you know, A/B experiments are great, but they don't tell you why one version of an experience is working over another.
I'd love to get into the what to do about it. I think we've all been in situations where you did figure out, okay, this actually seems like it's jargon. It seems like a term we use internally. Maybe we're confused internally. Erin and I certainly have a part of our product many parts of our product that we think this wording is clearly wrong. But then in my experience, it often ends up in a sort of debate among peers, throwing around different terms, and it's difficult to land anywhere. How do we get out of this cycle? I'd love to hear about some of the methods.
I think, well, I've used user testing a lot or any online survey tool, or even just go out on the street and ask people, what do you think of this word? And I worked at rover.com when it was a startup, and it was, we were struggling. We had tranched venture capital funding. So like we were scraping by. We didn't have a lot of resources to put toward a cool thing like an online testing platform like user testing, user Zoom or Dscout, what have you. But we took a clipboard, like literally pieces of paper and pens, and went downtown Seattle in front of a busy intersection and asked people, do you have a pet? Do you have a dog? Or if we saw people walking a dog, we'd be like, hey, over here, do you want a Starbucks gift card? We offered them $5 Starbucks gift cards and asked them, what words do you like? Or what words would you use for XYZ and why? And just scribbled notes and then ran back to the office and put them in a spreadsheet. So it was kind of very startup-y, but really helpful to let the product managers or whoever, the CEO, whoever was like, I don't believe that. We got the customers, the voice of the customers came through. It's, people get opinionated. People think they want to assert their authority or let their coworkers know how smart they are. It's really all about the customers. And I think that's the great thing about content testing is it's humbling. It helps teams work together better, I think, when people are like, oh, I was wrong. Not everyone has the wherewithal to admit that or to say that, but you will constantly say, oh, I'm surprised, or oh, that's not what I thought would happen. You're being more human as you do content testing, I think, because you're listening to people. And you're taking that information and you're sharing it with, your teams, and people get really excited when you learn these insights, these little golden nuggets of like, oh, people didn't think upper field, the example from Tracy that I mentioned before, I didn't explain, but she had upper field as this term throughout her website. And people thought it was actually like a UX direction, like in the upper right corner of your phone. Like people didn't realize it was a manager, like a regional manager. So the field manager is what they replaced upper field with, but it was perfect. It was all over the place. And she's like, well, this has to be right. It's everywhere. No. And to have she had to change that everywhere. Like everyone in the company knew about that change because it was in sales manuals. It was in onboarding training. It was everywhere. And even when your CEO learns that you're clarifying the content on your product, website, app, they get more respect for content. They realize, or the practice of content design, content strategy, they realize, oh my gosh, this is worth digging into, because the clarity immediately means fewer calls to customer service, which you can quantify and get like the dollar bill, like the dollar amount that you're saving your company, or improved revenue, improved loyalty. That's good stuff. With the economy being a little bumpy, like it's really important to be able to show impact, and content testing leads directly to impact for your business.
So let's spend some time on those two things you just mentioned, because I think this is going to be really useful for folks, which is impact and methods, right? I think it's very common, as you were saying, right now in the current economy, impact should always matter, in my opinion, to anyone in any business context. But especially right now, and especially for researchers who are kind of, let's say, in their adolescence, right? This is an established field going through some change and in a tough economy. So how do you show impact in the context of content design, of content research? And what are some methods you've seen have been really helpful in doing that?
Yeah, well, I go back to my favorite example, which is kind of, in retrospect, it's just mind-boggling, was at the health insurance company, which is Premier Blue Cross. Our digital VP was Curtis Kopf. He's great. He's now with REI.com. Really, really wonderful leader who empowered us by getting us user testing, SurveyMonkey. We had access to these tools. And what we noticed was we had a campaign that was very short in length. It was like eight weeks to sell Affordable Care Act health insurance plans, also known as Obamacare. And we weren't selling the most important plan. We had gold, silver, and bronze plans. And very, very stressful, execs coming into the digital digital experience section of our floor and kind of breathing down our necks, like what's going on? We're not selling in the silver plans like we wanted to. We have a sales quota. What the heck is going on? And we were selling bronze. We were selling gold. Gold are really expensive. People couldn't renew them. They couldn't afford them. Bronze, you couldn't see the doctors you wanted. You could afford that plan, the monthly premium, but you couldn't necessarily see the doctors or go to the hospital you need to. So bronze were dangerous. People were mad about the bronze plans. People were mad about the gold plans when they buy them and start using them. The silver was the happy medium. And it looked like the call to action button on the homepage, gold, silver, bronze, it looked like the silver one was broken. Like we had 3 buttons on the homepage. And I was like, well, the HTML must be broken. Like we're not selling silver plans. So let's go into the code and look. And so I just, I had, not all content designers are nerdy like me, but I know HTML, and I went in and I looked at the CTA button and I'm like, oh no, the HTML is working. We have a content problem. So we surveyed customers and asked them, gold, silver, bronze, which plan would you buy? Which is most appealing to you? And people told us, just like we expected, well, I can afford the bronze one, it's cheaper, or I have diabetes or a chronic health issue, so I'm going to buy the gold plan. But when we asked them why, we found out that people would not buy the silver plan because they thought it was a Medicare plan. They thought silver meant silver hair,
old,
Centrum silver, older.
Yeah, right.
Like even though there's nothing on the homepage to say anything about Medicare in this, this banner promotion on the buses, on the radio, like we were promoting this like crazy. And it was in the news everywhere, like gold, silver, bronze. You couldn't be an American at that time and not know that there were gold, silver, and bronze plans for sale. And you had to buy one or you're going to get taxed. There were going to be negative repercussions for not buying a plan. So people had to buy these plans against their will in many cases. But when we heard that people were like, silver's Medicare plan, I'm not going to buy a silver plan. We were like, the sirens started going off. And I swear, like when we used SurveyMonkey, we just asked like 20 people, what would you do? We got the results within like an hour. And we were like, holy bleep. We need to clarify that the silver plan is an Affordable Care Act plan. Holy, they were swearing. People were turning beet red. Like there was a lot of stress involved because if we didn't make these plans sell, if we didn't help these plans sell, that we knew there were going to be layoffs. Like there was going to be hell to pay.
And to be clear, you wanted to sell this plan because it was the right fit for a lot of people, right? Is that the idea?
Well, yeah. And we didn't want to explain everything on the homepage. Like we wanted to entice them to click through and learn more. Yeah. And this is like the Mama Bear health plan was, it's medium cost, medium benefits, good for you, good for everyone, good for the company, good for the customer. But we sold like, I don't know, like single digits of silver plans, and the other plans had sold like thousands. And we're like, what the heck is going on?
So what'd you call it? Teal?
we couldn't change the name. So, like anyone who's seen the Olympics gets gold, silver, bronze. So we could not change the name because it was a government mandate. Like these are what they're called. They had extra long, like formal names, but on the homepage, it was gold, silver, bronze, pretty much. So we had to add a line of content, just like with license and seat. We had to add, or we knew the right thing to do was to add a line of content to the homepage saying, this is an Affordable Care Act plan. This silver plan is an Affordable Care Act plan. If you need a Medicare plan, you have to go to the navigation and look at the Medicare. Like there was Medicare for sale on the website the rest of the year. This is where the mental model came from, was customers knew we did sell Medicare plans. We weren't promoting that on the homepage at the time or anywhere else or on the app or anything. But we were like, woo, woo, like sirens. We had to add a line of content. Again, the designer's like, you're mucking with my design. And I was like, step aside, buddy. We need to add this, like not that rudely, but seriously, we did need, we had so many rounds of design review. It did seem like disappointing and a little disruptive, to be honest, to add a line of content to say this silver plan is an Affordable Care Act plan. If you want Medicare, go here. But literally the second we added that and hit publish with this content management system, we started selling the plans. And Curtis was like, high five. Everyone was like, thank God. People were clapping. It was kind of ridiculous, honestly, that just all the stress involved. But we had this, tiny window, just only so many weeks to sell these plans, and then you can't buy them for another year.
Such an easier solution, it sounds like, too, than if it was a product problem. We all know that could be a large path to go down, big investment, right?
Oh, it could have been much more complicated. Yeah.
Or even changing the name of the plan. I think that's probably a good takeaway for some folks. It's like, I really want to rename this product or whatever it might be. And that might just not be tenable for whatever reason.
Well, I'd say if we could have created the product names or tested them ahead of time, yes, definitely. I think if you're working with your marketing team or business development, whoever at your company helps create new ideas, like the innovation team, whoever, like if you have a new product or new feature coming out, you should test the name of it so it doesn't inadvertently cause confusion. And I think if we could have renamed them, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, something easy to understand, expensive, not expensive, wicked expensive, or something. I'm joking, but what a commitment to buy a healthcare plan, but to understand that people were mucking it up. Their mental models were scrambled. And then of course we had to change all the radio ads. We had to change the social media. Like everyone in the company knew about this change. And it was really cool to have people go, oh, we need to be clear. And sometimes to be clear, you have to add more content. It might not be, people are I think UX, everyone's like, you have to write short. Sometimes you have to explain stuff.
So it sounds like in this case, you found out that it was a problem through doing a survey, digging deeper. I'd love to hear more about what are some other ways that getting into Erin's question about methods, what are some other sort of common methods you might use?
I'm so excited about the gold, silver, bronze example. To get into methods, I'd say you can do cloze testing, CLOZE. It's sort of like Mad Libs, where you take a chunk of content and you remove like every 5th or 7th word, and then get some participants and ask them to fill in the blanks. And that's for just general clarity. I think cloze testing has been around for, 40 years, longer than that. It's a super cheap, super fast way to find out if your overall content, longer form content, is clear. I think 5-second tests are also one of my favorites, where you show a landing page or a homepage or often your homepage is not your most important content, which I also get into in the book, but some important chunk of content, show it to people, especially if it's a prototype or new design, show it to people for 5 seconds and ask them what sticks in their mind about it. What did they notice? Sometimes they'll comment on design, but often what you want is them to comment on the words of like, which word did the CTA button stick out? Did anything, did they notice anything at all? Maybe not. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's not. I mean, it depends on your goals. I think heat mapping is another really interesting tool to use to see what people are noticing. Just asking people what they'd interact with or not is also eye-opening. Like, would you click on the CTA button? Actionability testing, I think, is really important to understand what steps people would take, or would they run for the hills? Are they being so turned off by your content or design that they're like, I'm going to close my laptop and take a nap. Like, I don't think, I get into many different types of testing in the book. Clarity is so important. And I think that's where most team discussions happen, or not discussion, disagreements happen. People are like, this is clear, this is fine. Ask your audience, is this clear to you? How would you explain this in your own words? Ask people to explain keywords in their own words. If you're like spreadsheet, let me go back to a Microsoft example. Can people explain what a spreadsheet is? Maybe not. Think of high school when you were taking a test and you got half credit. If you had to fill in the blank or, explain something in your own words, and your teacher gives you 50% credit because you didn't explain it very clearly. If people can explain things in their own words, then they're confident, that they're comfortable. But if they can't and they're like, I don't, like some people fudge that with license. They're like, well, you need it, you buy it, it's a thing. Like they couldn't articulate that you have to download it, or you have to, once upon a time you would plug in the key, the 16-digit key, and then, download it or get help to actually install software. I think if people are comfortable with the whole process and can explain it, and they're like, yeah, this is what happens, then they're cool. And the clarity has been achieved. Clarity is, you never know.
You mentioned Clarity, which is, of course, a Microsoft product that we use all the time for.
I didn't even think about.
Yeah. That's what I thought you were talking about at first, but that's been very helpful for us for doing some of the sorts of testing that you're talking about.
I think another really inexpensive or easy to use way to check on clarity is you can you can use, the Hemingway app, or Flesh Kincaid is another. You can run stuff if you're using Google Docs or Microsoft Word. Just plug your content in there and run a clarity check with those tools. They're not perfect because they're meant for paragraphs. They're meant for long form content. But if you have enough words that you can get is this 80% clear? Is this 90% clear? According to their algorithms, that can be helpful too. I like Merriam-Webster's dictionary is free online, and it tells you how frequently words are used, which, just gives you like a gut check of like, is this word okay? And my super cheap test is, does it have more than three or more syllables? I run for the hills when a word has 3 syllables or more. It's inherently more complicated. And I don't want to say dumb down your content and use only 2 syllables or 1 syllable words. That's not what I'm saying. But honestly, like for call to action buttons, if you see a 3 syllable word or longer, woo, like the sirens go off in my head, that you can often simplify just looking at the length of a word, the number of syllables in a word. And everyone can go online and use Merriam-Webster. I like Visual Thesaurus. That's $20 a year. It's not an attractive looking website, but it is an amazing, more robust website than Merriam-Webster's online thesaurus. It shows you visually relationships of words, like cousins. It gets into word origin, and it has this like visual display. It kind of, when you plug in a word, and it just kind of sprays like leaves or petals on a flower of like, oh, these are the related words. And it does, verbs, nouns, adverbs. It's so fun. If you're looking for a replacement word, if you know something is unclear and you need to replace it with something, Visual Thesaurus is super fun.
Oh, yes. It sounds like some of the methods you described are in the context of a prototype or visual design. So you mentioned a 5-second test where you see the screen. And then I think you also said there are methods that you might just take the words out and leave the visual design behind. I'd love to hear when you choose to use one of those, or how you choose which method.
I think if you're like Tracy at Zipline, and you're like, what's up with, these terms that are popping out at me as a new employee, just digging into the words that you use frequently by themselves can be really eye-opening without the design, without needing any help from designers or engineers or anything. You can just dig into the words. I really, really recommend that, to do what I call the 1-2 punches. Ask people like, what word would you use for XYZ? Or look at this word. How do you feel when you see this word? Asking people how words make them react emotionally is really interesting too. And getting those open-ended questions like, tell me more.
Do you have an example of, I'm just thinking about do you have an example of a time that you use that and what type of questions you ask?
Just really just 2 questions. I ask, usually start with like a multiple choice question, or just like a fill in the blank, like what word would you use for blah? And then ask people, how does this word make you feel? Or tell me more about this word. Tell me, you don't even have to tell them or ask them, how does it make you feel? Because some people react very strongly to that. They're like, oh no, I'm talking about my feelings.
Is this a case where, does it matter if you pose the question as, what word would you use, or what word do you use, or what word have you used in the past? I don't know. Does that matter here, or is it all kind of the same because it's just words? Depends. It's not behaviors.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of onboarding experiences or landing page. I'm trying to think of. I might need more coffee. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but it's really intriguing when people tell you, oh, this reminds me of something, or often they will say it reminds you of a product I used before and I didn't like it, or it reminds you of something technically complicated that was unpleasant or expensive or whatever. I think it depends on your industry, depends on what you're digging into. I think a lot of people who work at nonprofits and are like a team of one have used content testing to dig into, we want people to donate. We're doing fundraising, and that analyzing that experience, which words do you use a lot? Like give versus donate. I've done experiments with give versus donate, and a lot of people feel like donate is more altruistic feeling. It's longer. Give sounds like you're taking. And this is, there might be regionalisms with this too. You might want to do an A/B experiment to verify, but
and how do you, just to go deep on this one method, because it's nice to get tactical, When you said what word do you use for blah, I think I would be worried if I was writing that question that whatever I put in that blah space is going to influence their answer, right? So how do you even think about how to describe it in a way that doesn't influence their answer?
You kind of, I'm picturing Gumby, the green flexible character. Sometimes you have to bend over backwards to not reveal your motives or your underlying, like what you're getting at. And I get into techniques for that in the book of like how to phrase the question so that you don't give away what you're getting at. Like the license versus seat, it's like you don't want to use seat or license in the question itself. So it's like what term or word is used to describe what you need when you purchase software. Like that, it's like a long kind of slightly awkwardly syntactic, from a syntactic point of view, the sentence itself is a little wonky, but sometimes you have to do that Gumby, like the bending, to not give away.
You know what it makes me think of is taboo. You're playing taboo. You can't say any of the words on the card, and you're just trying to kind of dance around these things you can't say.
Totally. That flashes me. Funny side note, I worked at Cranium, the game company, for a while. I worked on their first online game, which was a massively before its time, massive failure. Pop culture online game with crowdsourced videos. Anyway, yeah, that could have benefited from some content testing, but I wasn't doing this at the time. Yeah.
So I have I think two more questions for you. One is this is a big one, but I'm curious how you think about this, because I think the answer is probably it depends, but I'm curious how you think about it, which is content doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in products, which usually have a visual interface. I mean, we could be talking about a voice AI or whatever, but let's assume there's a visual interface as well. How do you think about the syntax of sort of designing the visual with the words and testing those pieces separately or together? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, it does depend on your deadline, how much time you have. I mean, if you can dig into the words on their own, fantastic. I'm thinking of a project I'm working on right now where like we're sprinting to the finish line. We have to hand it off to engineering, like big rush. And we have to wait till it actually launches to test it. And like we're going to get some real feedback from real customers after it launches, which is fine. It's better than no feedback at all. Testing with the design, like people are going to be influenced by the color. They're going to what's the usability phenomenon where if a design is aesthetically pleasing, people immediately assume it's easier to use. It's like the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but there's a term for it. But yeah, I think there's if you want to test in tandem with design plus content, that's fantastic. I love system usability scale, system e-score, those comprehensive, baseline your overall user experience, and then go back in a quarter and see if the work that you've done has made a difference in making it less friction filled. Love those kind of in-depth metrics, but those take a long time to achieve. And whenever I bring it up at work, like let's do SUS or SES, everyone's like, oh God, we don't have time for that.
So in an ideal world, you would do the words on their own, then maybe bring them together with the design and then test again, or?
If you can, I mean, I just think about the typical UX team and how constrained we are. If you think of like I said, like the most frequently used words or the key most crucial words, often in a CTA button, where you want people to take action, those, if you have to choose, I mean, it would be, you don't have to test every word in every experience, but if you get into it and as you do content testing and you can inform your style guides or your design library, your whatever system you're using, and you can flag like, we tested this word on July 11th, 2023, and like link people off to your study reports, that's helpful. And then you build this wonderful compendium of helpful research for your whole team to use. That's what we did at Microsoft. It was pretty awesome how we dug into like, do people know what an app is? Do people know what the cloud is? When you mention cloud storage, like, do people get this blank stare? They do if they're an entrepreneur. If they're an admin with like 1,000 employees and they're really techie, they're cool with that. But really helpful to understand what was confusing to people and why. So yeah, I think I'd say like, don't don't worry about not being able to test everything or everything you want to, but start somewhere and share your results. And then more people in your organization will do testing, or they'll want to, or they'll, jump on the bandwagon. And then you start building, you start validating the words you're using and have that foundation of like, yeah, we tested it. Yeah, we tested it on this day. Like things aren't going to stay true forever. Like in 2027, maybe license and seat would test differently. But when you start sharing, and sharing is caring, and people get wind of what's going on, they get excited. And then they want to do it, not just content designers and product designers, but PMs, engineers. Like I worked with engineers on error messages, and they're like, we should test this word. I'm like, damn right we should. Yeah. And it's exciting.
Sounds like it's self-fulfilling in a way.
It's kind of contagious. Yeah. It's awesome because it's helpful to not assume. It's helpful to think about the customer, like, is this really the best word? Or could this be clearer? Or could this be simpler? I think the simple language guidelines from Sarah Richards are amazing. And if I could get a little political for a second, I think a lot of people have come up to me and said, I don't want to write simply because it reminds me of Donald Trump. Seriously, I got that feedback from some lawyers I worked with and some people, mostly at Premier Blue Cross. They're like, that was when like the election was getting very hairy. But a lot of people, or his campaign, like clearly his political, I don't even want to say, like his attention was, he was getting more and more attention. Like dumbing down and simplifying are different things. And yeah, and I think he uses like political rhetoric, like that is a technique. Simple language, short sentences is a technique used in political speech writing.
Rhetoric is helpful.
Like that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I honestly, like I get this a lot when I do Q&As. People are like, "Well, aren't you talking like Donald Trump?" I'm like, no. Like, okay, maybe like there's similar techniques, but with different inspirations, different motivations. Like we were trying to make customer experience awesome. It's not dumbing down. It's making things clear so people can successfully complete their jobs to be done, whatever they're doing on your app or website or whatever.
You mentioned a few resources. Erin was nodding. Erin's more of a writer than I am. You mentioned Simple Language Guidelines and Hemingway. Maybe we can link to those, but can you describe a little bit more what those two tools are?
Yeah. Well, I think, and Hemingway's it measures how simple your language is. It tells you which words might need to be replaced. If your sentences are too long, you should chop them into pieces. Honestly, the Flesch Kincaid Wikipedia page is super interesting. FLESCH-KINCAID. Flesch Kincaid is the language algorithm that people use to make sure that their language is simple. It's embedded in Word, and Google Docs has I think a slightly different algorithm. Like if you ask it to do a spelling check or a language check, grammar check, it'll give you a score. Yeah, and I'm trying to think, like Visual Thesaurus is another thing I recommend heartily. It's so great. Usertesting.com has a whole bunch of resources too online. They're merging with UserZoom, so there's some, I'm not sure what the URL is going to be down the road, but DScout, UserZoom, User Testing, they have a lot of online resources about like how to simplify your language, how to dig into the language and make it easier to understand. Jeff Soro, I'd say Jeff Soro's website, he's a user researcher, but I think he invented, hold on, I'm gonna have to look at my own book. I think he invented SUS, System Usability Scale, or he was one of the he wasn't the only one. But yeah, I think digging into a more complex testing framework like SUS is really fun to do too, but I'm a nerd, so. But yeah,
I don't think you're the only one. You keep saying. I think you're in good company on that one. I have to say.
I think for nerdy language or just content design in general, I think I mentioned Michael Metz. He and Andy Waffler wrote Writing is Designing, also from Rosenfeld Media, and Scott Kuby I think he's in Rhode Island. He was working with Christina Halverson at Brain Traffic in Minneapolis, but he's now in Rhode Island, I believe, and he has some great newsletters about the content design world, content resources, and job hunting stuff too. He's really big on helping people find jobs. So
excellent. We'll link that all in the notes. I just wanted to end with looking forward and talking about the future just briefly, which is, as a relatively, right, again, we started by talking about the sort of renaissance and the change of this field of content design. So what do you expect it might look like in the near or distant term with everything happening both with the economy, with, I don't know, with AI, with pick your thing? Where's it going?
Oh, AI. I would recommend people follow Michael Caulfield from the University of Washington. He's a misinformation specialist. He's got a book coming out in the fall. I don't know the name of it. Sorry, Michael, but he's a very very smart guy. I mean, the use of AI has dipped in just the last 2 weeks. I'd say, writing is a skill that everyone should have. They shouldn't lean on AI to do it for them. I think it will be used generatively for people doing content design for websites sometimes, but I think you really need the human touch to make things awesome, to make things usable, to understand your audience's reaction to things. You still need people for that. So that's my mini rant about AI. I think any new communication tool, like if you look at the history of TV and radio, like TV didn't eradicate radio. I think things evolve and change, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's
but
interesting.
the future is bright for content design. Or
I'd say this: smart companies hire content designers because the ROI is huge. And I have examples in my book of, you save your company $75,000 by improving content in a specific customer experience. And my coworker Trudy at Microsoft saved Microsoft $2 million by doing a little content testing and figuring out what information, what gaps in the information, what gaps in the content were there. And she filled them, and she's saving them millions of dollars. So I'd say smart companies have content designers on staff who don't do office hours. I'll rant for 2 seconds about office hours. Office hours are draining. Having so few people on your staff that you need them to pinch hit on projects that they're not involved in and context switch is crazy making and draining and leads to burnout. Companies are successful when they have staff, content designers, content strategists who can dig in and understand what words are working for your audience and why, and which ones are not working and why, and share that information with your whole UX team.
Awesome. Erica,
rant.
No, that's great. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Have a great day.
Hey there, it's me, Erin.
And me, JH.
We are the hosts of Awkward Silences, and today we would love to hear from you, our listeners.
So we're running a quick survey to find out what you like about the show, which episodes you like best, which subjects you'd like to hear more about, which stuff you're sick of, and more just about you, the fans that have kept us on the air for the past 4 years.
Filling out the survey is just going to take you a couple of minutes. And despite what we say about surveys almost always sucking, this one's going to be fantastic. So userinterviews.com/awkward survey. And thanks so much for doing that.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Awkward Silences, brought to you by User Interviews.
Theme music by Fragile Gang.